Welcome to Watchtower History. The Watchtower Cemeteries and Pyramid Monument has had a very interesting history. In the 1980s, Charles Taze Russell's grave was vandalized, and the Pyramid Monument was opened, and its contents were removed in the 1990s. At the end of 2020, the cross and crowns on the monument were hacked out, and in recent weeks, the monument has been vandalized again, reopened, and as we stated last week, the entire monument was in danger of collapse. We felt it was important to do a deep dive, to do a little research on the history of these cemeteries, so we could see where it started, where it began, we could see what it was like, and we kind of have an idea of what happened to it.
And it did not turn out quite like we thought it was going to.
So there was a Margaret Wibble who owned the farm before it was a cemetery. Her husband had passed away and she was left with the farm. And then later on, after it's sold to Watchtower and renamed to the United Cemeteries, you could see the same plot of land there with that on there.
Just a quick question. Is St. Philema Cemetery still there?
It's owned by it's a Catholic cemetery now. So
still presently there. Gotcha.
There was a special issue of Zion's Watchtower. It was an extra, A Conspiracy Exposed and Harvest Siftings, published April 25th, 1894. And in this book, Russell mentions that selling books was not the only means by which they were making money. Of course, they weren't asking for money like other churches do, so they had to find other means to accomplish the task. I don't have a problem with a church making money as long as they're actually putting the money into the work. Are they lining their own pockets? What is their lifestyle? Is the work used to get the message out? Or are they getting Cadillacs and mansions out of the deal? We'll get into the finances a little bit more. Stay tuned. He says, my money capital being limited, I saw that it would never do to invest the funds in mortgages or in a bank, because the interest on the sum would be inadequate to the demands of ourselves and the work. Under what seemed to be providential leaning, I decided to invest with some others in some oil property, oil wells. I chose this business because it seemed to be profitable and because it would require a little or no time and personal attention for others. Interested in looking out for their own interests, necessarily looked out for mine also, and this judgment has, on the whole, proved correct. Several coins having been taken from the fish's mouth for our support in the Lord's cause. Now, in this, he mentions that I preferred not to have my own name on the notice because my forenoons are usually spent at home writing, and because my name being necessarily prominent, I modestly preferred to avoid any unnecessary notoriety. So this is where we're starting with the story of how we get into the United Cemeteries, or how Watchtower got into the United Cemeteries.
And the year and that statement is very important. So keep in tune with that as we progress with the story. And on this slide we're having right here is the transcript from the separation, the legal separation of Charles Taze Russell and his wife, Mariah. And Jeff, if you can elaborate on this a little further.
Okay, so in this, it talks about some of the corporations that Watchtower was using in order to make a little money on the side. So he says, the money we don't feel at liberty to use in any way, that is to say, to use it in our ordinary way of printing tracts, etc., with it. We feel we must hold that in a measure for the benefit of the people if they should ever call for it. And therefore, we invest it in such a way as we are enable it to bring in some returns. And then the question is asked, did any of the donors request the return of their money to them? He said, yes, sir. Oh, yes. As we proceed further into the trial transcript, on pages 26 to 30, now they're asking about this investment company, the United States Investment Company, that was a holdings company for Watchtower at the time. It reads, and you transferred to this society all your interest in the United States Investment Company? Yes, sir. How many shares did you have in that? Well, it was a little company that merely had a capital of $1,000. Just a very small concern. Is it small today? Yes, sir. You never took any particular interest at all? Yes, sir. Who were the organizers? Russell says, I was the principal one. And that company was engaged in real estate and other businesses. Russell answers, that company was organized merely as a holding company so that my name would not be connected with different things. The close connection between the investment company and the Watchtower Society came out in the next part of the exchange. And so the question's asked, who are the officers of the United States Investment Company? J.A. Bonet, that's our Miracle Wheat man, who we've had a discussion on before, Mr. Williamson, and a J.G. Logan. These men whom you mentioned are all assistants in the Bible House? Yes, sir. So Russell was trying to keep his name out of the investments that he had because he claims because of the notoriety. So we'll see if that's true in this case as we proceed into the story.
And before we go into that, because we're going to have a discussion on Charles Russell, in his day, he was famous. He was right up there with the Barnum and Bailey, Ringling Brothers, traveling the world, doing all that. So he was famous. He had newspaper articles, radio programs, public speaker. He was well known. So keep that in mind as we progress in the discussion.
And we discussed a little bit of that when we did our Faith in Action review. A lot of those newspaper articles, of course, were purchased newspaper space by Watchtower itself in order to get his name out there, in order to get in the newspapers. But once he had the notoriety and once he was a little more famous, then when he would do something, sometimes there would be free publicity published. So in the Russell versus the Brooklyn Eagle trial, and remember, this is the trial, the Miracle Wheat trial, and Russell and Watchtower is trying to sue the Brooklyn Daily Eagle for slander. And so in the transcript, William E. Van Amberg is on the stand and they're questioning him. The United States Investment Company purchased the cemetery plot for $27,000. Keep that amount in mind because we're going to be returning to that later on. So on page 202 of the trial transcript, Van Amberg is asked how much it was purchased for, and he says $27,000.
Which back then was a considerable amount of money.
Yeah, but of course they're buying quite a bit of land. So he says, it wasn't my money that bought it. It was the money of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. I conveyed to the United States Investment Company. They deeded it to the United Cemetery Company that they created. The society thought well to have some place where it would have a good asset. It looked around in various places and they found a farm. And they arranged for United Cemeteries Company as being the most stable. It could not run away, something satisfactory that they could always be used as an asset. Therefore, it deemed wise to use $27,000 of the society's money on this investment. It bought the farm. It was then agreed to take it in my name, and I passed it on to the United States Investment Company, and from the United States Investment Company to the United Cemeteries Company. That is the deed of the United Cemeteries Company that the company is. So this is where they started it.
And according to this, it didn't come from Russell's personal money. To get some background in this, Russell sold his businesses, his clothing businesses. When he sold the businesses, did he take his funds and put them into the society? So therefore, ultimately, it wasn't his funds, it was the society's anyway. So then back to the money, where the society got their money. Was it funded by Russell? If not, where did the society get $27,000 and all this money that it needed to invest and put into assets?
Remember, Mariah was a school teacher. They don't make all that much money. Russell was the owner of a haberdashery company, so he had money, he had prestige. But once they started the preaching work together, once they started the Watchtower together, everything went into the society. And they were always trying to find ways to keep it going because the sale of the books wasn't going to be enough to keep and fund the work that they needed to do. So there was always little side things.
Where I'm going with this is he got 300 for his businesses, 300,000. Okay. At this point in time, where is his money? Where did 300,000 go? Did he spend most of that by now?
Well, we know that he bought oil wells and some things like that from the statements that we have here. We know that he had investment companies and they're buying property, and they're selling cemetery plots here. And it tells us how much the cemetery plots are going for. So on page 610 of the trial transcript, it says, "This being a benevolent organization, the lots are placed on sale on that cemetery in the suburbs of Pittsburgh at about 1/5 to 1/10 of what they can be gotten for elsewhere." And we're going to check those prices. We're going to look at that a little bit, and also some statements made about their cemetery plots as to how expensive they might have been. There are lots. It is a fact. There are many people in the large cities that are not able to buy a cemetery lot, scarcely able to buy a place to bury their dead. And we arranged for plans there, or plans were arranged through the cemetery company, so that one could get a 5-grave plot for $15, large enough to bury the whole family. The society has received income from that source, and it is receiving it now as it comes in, and we're receiving it in 1911 and 1909. And the miracle wheat was raised on that property. So again, if you haven't seen that discussion on miracle wheat, check that out. We do a real good deep dive on that, and there's a lot of very interesting history there.
And again, to interject, this is the reason why we had those discussions prior. We've had comments on why is everybody looking at just the pyramid and getting excited about that. We've laid, our other videos laid down foundations to show all the background and everything for this stuff, so that as we progress, we can have, and it goes undisputed. So when we get into doctrines and other things, all that was discussed in the past is going to come up again, and like it is now in this case.
Here is a photo of the cemetery around 1907. There are several examples of advertisements that I've included here that I was able to find in the newspaper record. A 12-grave burial plot can now be purchased in United Cemeteries near the main entrance for $25. So 12 graves for $25. In the lower left corner, this is a little later on. This would be around 1914, 1915 time period. It says, "By the way, $19.80 spot cash will buy a good 6-grave burial plot." You can see inflation there a little bit. The lower right corner says the cost of an adult single grave in the United Cemeteries is only $12, including the grave digging and burial plots suitable for 6 adult graves are obtainable there. Corner markers at from $20 to $300, according to one location. So it just depends where in the cemetery you would be located as to how much it would be. If you wanted a better location, they would charge a little bit more. If you remember, John A. Bonnet was our miracle wheat man. In the January 30th, 1917 St. Paul Enterprise, it says, "Pilgrim Brother J. A. Bonnet, who for 10 years has had charge of the Society's cemetery and farm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, reports of the need for 2 more Truth Brethren permanently to keep the place in good condition." The March 29th, 1905 Pittsburgh Press has a short little note about the purchase of the property. And it says that property owners in Shaler Township have organized the Rosemont, Mount Hope, and Evergreen Cemeteries Company and will apply for a charter on April 10th. The company has a tract of 30 acres, so they bought a lot of property. Not just that little section that we know of, they bought quite a bit of it. So the company has a tract of 30 acres near Evergreen, and the money received from the sale of lots will be used to reimburse those from whom the land is secured. After the acreage is paid, the income of the company will be used in beautifying the cemeteries. The company has no capital stock and no dividends will be paid. And we have that charter as well, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Stay tuned. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle of November 5th, 1911 has an article, "Pastor Russell, a Clever Financier." The Brooklyn Eagle is claiming that he duped prominent Pittsburgh clergymen into supporting his cemetery scheme. We know who they were, and we know what they said. So let's take a look at the charter real quick. This is the charter of the cemetery company. And it says the name of the corporation shall be Rosemont, Mount Hope, and Evergreen United Cemeteries. And he lists out a bunch of names. If you look down towards the middle of the longer list at the bottom of the page, you will see C.T. Russell's name there. That's very important. I did a little research on who all these names are, who these individuals are. Cortland Whitehead was an Episcopalian minister. S. Edward Young was a Presbyterian. B.F. Woodburn was a Baptist, and James Wright Witherspoon was a Presbyterian.
Which goes back to other discussions in reference to how all the religions got along. Russell didn't condemn or like Rutherford, condemn and shun every other religion. He even had business arrangements with them. So, and they were religious people. He seeked out religious people.
Well, what kind of business arrangement was it? Right? Because did they make any money that they were able to share in the cemeteries? No, they weren't getting money to give to the shareholders of the United Cemeteries. The money was to go to, half of the money was to go to the upkeep of the cemetery, and the other half was to go to Watchtower. Now, all the rest of the men on here are all Bible students. I put cross and crowns on them to identify them, to make it very easy to see visually. I was able to find photos for each of the men except for one. Almost all of them had were either pilgrim speakers or had some kind of association with Russell in the early movement. Some had died early on, like William Wright died pretty early. Francis Winton down there in the lower corner. He was one of the Bethelites. He and his wife worked at the Bible House in Pittsburgh. And John A. Bonnet, of course, is our Miracle Wheat man. Back to the Miracle Wheat trial. Now, when Dr. Walter E. Spill, is asked about the cemetery, he was an osteopathic physician, and he says something very interesting. He says, I am president of the United Cemeteries Company. As president of that company, I authorize Mr. Bonnet to plant and use such part of the grounds of the cemetery as were not in use for cemetery purposes. I have been president, I believe, for about 4 years. Maybe a little more or a little less. Mr. Bonnet had that right and privilege during all the time I have been president. And I like what he says. I've been on the cemetery board for about 4 years, I believe, and I've never had a patient buried there. So a little humor.
That's funny. You could see a little. I'm sure back in the day, with everybody dying under quackery, that was like his plug to let everybody know, hey, I don't sell snake oil.
So back to our Brooklyn Daily Eagle. It says that the treasurer and president was only a figurehead. Now that's interesting. Let's see what they say. J.G. Messner, he was a Bible student, remember? He was also an insurance agent. He was the president of the board of trustees, I think, before Spill. Russell told me to act as treasurer and president of the board of trustees, he said to an Eagle representative who questioned him about his connection with the cemetery deal. The business was all done somewhere else. Then one day Russell telephoned to me. Messner, he said, I know you're a busy man. I've got a girl in the office here who can handle the money for the cemeteries. Just send me a check for what money you have on hand, and I'll take care of the business from now on. I sent him a check for several $100s, which for some reason he kept on hand and didn't cash. I only learned this later when I got notice that the bank in which the money was deposited had failed. Messner was asked what had become of the property. I believe it's being run by some of Russell's loyal representatives, he answered. I understand they are selling a good many lots and doing quite a business. It has a beautiful location and probably was a good investment. All right, so this is important to where we're going now. So now we're going to talk about the other individuals who were listed on that charter, the non-Bible students. The Brooklyn Eagle now is going to ask them what their involvement with the United Cemeteries was. Pastor had no idea Russell was connected with this scheme. So the Reverend S. Edward Young pastor of the Bedford Presbyterian Church of this city, when shown the above dispatch at his home, wrote the following statement. And he wrote, "I recall that several years ago, probably 7 or 8 years, I was asked to serve as trustee of a new cemetery which had some such name as the Rosemont, Mount Hope, and Evergreen United Cemeteries. That Bishop Whitehead of the Protestant Episcopal Church, Diocese of the Pittsburgh, Dr. Woodburn of the First Baptist Church, Allegheny, and other ministers and laymen well known to me were to be fellow trustees. Upon being persuaded in my own mind that the enterprise was hardly the sort of one I had been assured it would be, I served notice that my name should be dropped from the list of trustees. I never attended a meeting of the trustees or any meeting with anybody in connection with the matter, and really do not know what became of the enterprise, whether it took actual form and became operative or not. I put no money in it, had no stock in it. The promise or stock or other interest, the Eagle's Dispatch, is the first intimation I have had of Pastor Russell's relation to the properties." So I'm curious what you think about what the Reverend Young is saying here, because I had to think this through a little bit of what he's actually saying.
He thought it was a sham and said, "I don't want no part of it." That's what he's ultimately saying.
It sounds like that, but how did he know it was a sham? Because note, he says very clearly, "I don't know what happened to it. I never attended any meetings." It sounds to me like he signed up, it wasn't what he thought it was going to be, and he jumped out of it real quickly. And so he doesn't even know if it actually became a cemetery company or not. He simply
in
backed out.
reality, he has no comment due to not having knowledge in this.
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
Okay, he was invited, and then just never mind.
Right.
Kind of like going to a timeshare.
Yeah.
You get invited, you get your free lunch, your free dinner, whatever, and no, thank you, and you're out of there. So,
yeah. So it's interesting that the Eagle lists that, but it doesn't help the case one way or another, other than I don't know what happened to it, and he got out of it very quickly. What happened to James Geisey? James Geisey's daughter. We know what happened to her later on. We see in one of the Bible student splinter groups, they had a magazine called The Kingdom Scribe. It mentions her passing. And it says her burial took place in Houston, Texas. She was the daughter and last surviving member of the family of James Geisey, who lived in Allegheny. So it looks like they went with the splinter groups, that family. And in the history book by Alan Rogerson, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, it says that there was a revolt in 1911 that included a group of influential Bible students. Geisey was one of those. They went off a certain direction, and that was even before Rutherford took over. And they were still around at that time. And even within some of the other splinter groups, like the Pastoral Bible Institute, her name will be listed in there. So it's like these groups were meeting and communicating together after they came out of Watchtower. Another one of the Bible student splinter groups that mentions this is that of the Layman's Home Missionary Movement that Paul S.L. Johnson started. He has a couple articles on it in the 1940s. One is October 1940 and the other is October 1943. And Johnson's very hard to read because as much as we've seen how Rutherford would take types or parables or prophecies and apply everything to Watchtower after 1914,
Johnson invented it. Johnson, or at least perfected it, unlike anyone else.
And I think it was the relationship between these two men, between Johnson and Rutherford. They were in a race to figure out how many of these things they could apply to themselves. To say, hey, I'm the chosen one, right? Our group is the chosen one.
That's a tough debate to answer which one of them won. Most people watching this probably are very familiar with the Jehovah's Witnesses. obviously, but a lot probably aren't too up to speed with Johnson. But he was right up there with him. He just didn't grow a church as large as Rutherford was capable of doing. But they had a lot of types and anti-types. I'm the Epiphany messenger. I'm the Parousia messenger. A lot of stuff going on there.
And you can see some of it in the little blow-ups that we have on the screen. You'll see some of this type making that Johnson did in the statement that I'm going to read here. He says, David therein representing our pastor, Nabal, its evil directors, and Abigail, its good directors. Among others, prominent its evil directors were Mr. J.B. Edmondson, one of the four leaders of the combination sifting, 1891 to 1894, Mrs. Maria Frances Russell, the leader of the reformism sifting, 1901 to 1904, and Mr. Geisy, its vice president from about 1906 to 1909, and the chief non-pilgrim leader of the contradictionism sifting in 1908 to 1911. These three are referred to not as the only evil directors of the society, but merely as examples of such. So we know that they separated from Russell in these years, and I think it's related to that New Covenant schism that they had, the disagreement about the whole New Covenant idea. But it looks like from the article that we mentioned previously that those groups, after they came out, were still communicating with each other. They just weren't communicating with the Watchtower after they left out.
And one note on this, if you follow some of the old Watchtowers and writings that were going back and forth, remember, Rutherford was reading all this stuff, and he was calling them the evil directors, the evil slave. They were going back and forth. And Rutherford, for whatever you want to think about that, invited them to join him and to follow him, but they just refused to do it. For probably reasons.
Well, remember what we know Johnson and Rutherford are reading each other's writings because they're practically mentioning each other by name or taking the same ideas. And one is saying, no, I'm the chosen one. The other one saying, no, I'm the chosen one. And they're going back and forth with each other. But that group, this Geisy that left, they would have kept most of Russell's teachings. And that may be another discussion for a future time. But they did avoid Watchtower after Russell's death. There are several photos here from 1907 on. There was a little booklet published with some of the photos. So if you look, you could see the beautiful hills and mountains in the area there, the Allegheny Mountains. On a couple of the slides, you see a part of the cemetery before a lot of the plots were filled up. And as we go further, you can actually see the farmhouse where Bonnet lived. That's at the bottom of the hill now, where the Masonic Temple is. When Watchtower sold the property in 1917, that pretty much remained unused for decades. It wasn't until the 1980s that it was purchased by the Masons, and they built the Masonic Temple there. So that was Bonnet's house at the bottom of the hill, and we had that discussion in our Watchtower Secret newspaper discussion. Here's the one about Pilgrim J.A. Bonnet. In the Society's farm and cemetery near Pittsburgh, has room as a future home for two capable truth sisters on Bible house terms. Same as at Bethel, and will be glad to hear from a mother and daughter or two sisters. He wants 2 or 3 truth brethren with good physical ability to join him on the Society's cemetery farm service on the Bible house terms and make the place their future home. And the photo, that's the grave of Russell with the farmhouse at the bottom. You'll see that is at the Watchtower Cemetery plot. So right at the, Russell's buried up on the hill, right at the bottom of the hill is where Bonnet's home was. We'll talk about that in a couple of slides.
Which is now what everybody questions, is that a Masonic temple?
Yeah, there's a Masonic temple right at the bottom of the hill now.
Where the farm used to be.
But a couple of years before the pyramid is built there, that marked the grave sites, there's also that shot of Abbott sitting on the porch there. So that's a very important historical photograph. One of the photos here, you'll see an aerial view of the pyramid. And then you'll see the Masonic Temple down there. If you look to the right of the photo, you'll see 4 white graves and two little white ones. But if you compare the photo on the left, those graves are no longer there. So it's either the markers were replaced, they were removed. I know that the pyramid monument had names on it for some of the graves that were in the area that had absolutely no markers at all. So now that the monument is missing, unless you had a map of where the burial plots were, you wouldn't know where they're buried. You can see a close-up of the farmhouse with the chickens at the bottom here and a couple of the men working. You can see they're still using animals. That was the time period. And then a couple sisters sitting on the hammock out in front of the farmhouse there. And then there's one photo of inside of the farmhouse. But that's all the photo that there is. The woman's face is cut off there on the left. In the Will and Testament of Charles Taze Russell, he lists out the directions for the funeral. He states, I desire to be buried in the plot of ground owned by our society in the Rosemont United Cemetery, and all the details of arrangements respecting the funeral service I leave in the care of my sister, Mrs. M. Land, and her daughters Alice and May, or such of them as may survive me, with the assistance and advice and cooperation of the brethren, as they may request the same. Instead of an ordinary funeral discourse, I request that they arrange to have a number of the brethren accustomed to public speaking make a few remarks each, that the service be very simple and inexpensive, and that it be conducted in the Bible House Chapel or any other place that may be considered equally appropriate or more so. Well, they did have give some remarks in the Bible House Chapel. They did rent out Carnegie Hall and had the funeral there. We also know that his sister, Mrs. Land, we know from the New Era Enterprise that Russell's sister was not involved in the plans for the funeral. This, of course, was brought up in our Watchtower secret newspaper discussion. The politicking about who was going to be the next president was already beginning. So on the front page of the newspaper of this St. Paul Enterprise, Brother Macmillan is so petulant, liking in tech and egotistical, that I have been tempted very sorely by him. I love Brother Macmillan, but I cannot do other than resist several little traits he's possessed with. I could tell of a heartbreaking story of his persistent attempts to humiliate me, but have striven as bravely as I can to permit none of it to disturb the serenity or even the tenor of my way.
And who's writing this?
Abbott, the editor of the Enterprise. Yep. He was supposed to speak at the funeral, and Macmillan stepped in and said, nope, you don't have any part in it. It was because Macmillan couldn't control the Enterprise. Right? He could control the Watchtower. In that particular article, the same one where he writes about Macmillan, he says, it is within the bounds of possibility, if not probability, that some will be led astray by ambition or pride to have their own way now that the master director is gone. It is possible that some will become sulky and rebel against the arrangement.
You know,
how prophetic.
And we'll get into it more when we discuss the will, because the names don't match up. So we'll save this one. But good catch to go back to that.
And we might have a different opinion on the will, but it'll be good to discuss it. That's a future discussion coming. And the question is, well, why? And I'm surprised they even published this, and with name.
Now, the first thing I get out of this is the recalling of the latter story of Jehovah's Witnesses saying ambitious men were trying to steal the Watchtower and take over the... Now, here very early, prior to all that came out, here we see a whole other show of evidence of, hey, we want to print it first. Hey, we want to control this. So it leaves a lot open. Who was really the ambitious people trying to take over the society, trying to control it? This is a good find for that. And the date of it is just perfect for all this.
Yeah, and it's written at the time. It's a first-hand account. So it's not somebody claiming, 30, 40 years later, like in Macmillan's book, Faith on the March. This is what I remember that happened, but his facts were a little fuzzy at that time. This is written right at the time. So
he's a reputable person.
Yeah. He was well respected.
It's in the newspaper. He didn't not sign it. He just came right out and said, this is what it is. So it is very interesting, like you said, what happened shortly after this then even. But we'll do a whole other discussions on that.
Right. And this is signed by him. This is his article.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone knew who the abbot was. Everyone knew the paper. Everyone knew Macmillan. And so this was probably not a surprise. It would be a surprise for those who read Macmillan's book, who doesn't share with you all the background of what was going on at the time. Now, there's hearsay evidence. And again, it's hearsay. But it is rumored, and this story is secondhand. Somebody who had been at the funeral, standing behind Mariah when she went to the casket of her deceased husband. It is said that she laid flowers on the casket, and she was heard to say, "I'm sorry, I had done you wrong." Watchtower records a couple of other very similar stories. In the 1975 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses, it says, "What took place at C.T. Russell's funeral at Pittsburgh in 1916 also is significant along these lines. Anna K. Gardner, whose recollections are similar to those of others present, tells us this. An incident occurred just before the services at Carnegie Hall that refuted lies told in the paper about Brother Russell. The hall was filled long before the time for the services to begin, and it was very quiet, and then a veiled figure was seen to walk up to the aisle to the casket and to lay something on it. Up front, one could see what it was, a bunch of lilies of the valley, Brother Russell's favorite flower. There was a ribbon attached saying, 'To my beloved husband.' It was Mrs. Russell. They had never been divorced, and this was a public acknowledgement." The August 1st, 1994 Watchtower has another similar story. It reads, "In 1916, we were saddened by the death of Brother Russell. Since we lived right in Allegheny, we attended his funeral at Carnegie Hall. Sarah Kalin, a well-known co-porter in Pittsburgh, knew the Russells personally. At the funeral, she saw Mariah Russell place some flowers in the casket with the note, 'To my beloved husband.' Though she had separated from him some years earlier, Mariah still recognized him as her husband." When Charles Taze Russell died, he was buried there on the hill. And you can see the gentleman standing right in the center of the photo, nearest to the casket and gone home. That is John A. Bonnet. That's our Miracle Wheat Man. And you can see the gravestone here, Pastor C.T. Russell, in the snow there in 1919. This is from the 1919 convention report. This is before the new markers were purchased and put there. And now Pastor Russell is laid to rest. It says nearly 2,000 persons attended the services. You could see them preparing to take the photos and preparing the grave. This photo is interesting because the November 14th, 1916 St. Paul Enterprise has a little note. And it says, "At the grave, 2 heavily veiled ladies followed the coffin, one on the arm of Brother Hiles of Washington, the other on the arm of another brother. I think it was Brother Driscoll. One of the ladies was Mrs. Russell, a widow indeed, and I shed a tear for her as I thought how she has suffered, and that from her viewpoint she had been wronged. I hope she will be brought nearer the Master by the death of her husband, and will not remain in widowhood, but become of the bride of Christ Jesus." And you could see the casket being carried there in the center of the photo, and behind the casket are the 2 veiled women. So one of those is Mariah Russell, and the other one is Russell's sister.
Now, it's interesting that they would actually write something like that in their newspaper. Usually when somebody dies, you don't like, you know, give somebody advice in a public column, like that. That's something you might say in private to her,
Yeah.
but apparently their feud was so out there in all their eyes that it was like not a big deal to print it. They're already doing it in front of us anyway. So interesting side notes going on with that. And we are going to have a discussion about that in the future.
At some point, another discussion for another time, as we say. It's interesting, this article as well, because it mentions, I hope she'll become one of the bride of Christ. What happened to Mariah after this? It looks like she was still teaching a lot of the same concepts and ideas that her and her husband had been teaching previous. She had written a couple of books, The Gospel of the Kingdom and the Twain one, which I do have here. This one is interesting because it asks the question, do the scriptures teach domestic slavery? How sin interfered with God's original purpose in the domestic relation? What the scriptures say about the submission of wives to their own husbands? And the ideal domestic happiness. So Russell had his book called The New Creation that dealt with a lot of the same subject matter, and Mariah had hers as well. But we will get into some of that in a future discussion. And then there was one more unpublished manuscript that Barbara Anderson has been able to uncover, and she has since published that for download and for sale on her website. In the Daily Republican of November 29th, 1916, there's a little snippet of an article entitled Pastor Russell's Will. And it says, an estate of $200 is all that Pastor Charles T. Russell left, according to his will, which will be published tomorrow in the December issue of the Watchtower. The estate is bequeathed to his widow. So he left her $200. Today that would be about $5,000 with the inflation calculator. Why didn't he give her more? I'm curious. How does this make you feel when you read this article?
Well, it strikes me as a terrible divorce, or terrible separation, where obviously one was rather have the society continue rather than finance his ex-spouse. So to leave $200 when the buildings and everything was worth a lot more, it's questionable. It raises some red flags, but obviously every divorce, people don't want to give, or separation, they don't want to give their spouse the bulk of their estate. So let's continue in the investigation and see what we come up with.
They say truth is like a three-edged sword. There's your side, my side, and the truth in between. That's usually what it is. You got to have both stories, both sides of the story in order to figure out what the truth of the matter is. So when you look at the separation trial between Mariah and Charles, you got to look at her side of the story, his side of the story, and then try to piece it all together. And they try to do that, of course, in the trial transcript as well. With most marriages that break up, there's problems on both sides. Neither one is completely innocent, right? Both Charles and Maria told some stories that doesn't make either one of them look like a saint. With that said, I think Charles was trying to find a way to protect the money so that the work could continue no matter what would happen between him and her. One of the rumors amongst those who are researching this part of history is that perhaps Russell was trying to hide the money from his wife, and so they put it into the cemeteries here and some other things as well. But how much money would they make from the cemeteries? Was it really that good of an investment? And if he wanted to keep the religious work going, he had to keep control of the money. So he donated it all to the work. So honestly, there were some things that she did that she should not have done and said in the trial. And absolutely the same is true of Charles. So we plan on doing a deep dive on that in the future. That's a very big discussion, but one we'll do at some point in the future. Another story for another time, as we say.
Now, a little interjection in that to neither defend nor uncredent somebody on this. They knew what he had. For him to hide money was done more out in the open because obviously his wife at any given time in the future could go to a court and say, hey, he's got money somewhere, he's doing this, he's doing that. I wouldn't compare it to the same thing as Beth Sarem. Hey, build me a mansion and don't worry about how we're paying for it or this or that. It's quite an opposite there. I got to say, I get the sense that Russell was more or less looking to keep the foundation going, and so in a modest way. As we get into the discussions in the future with that divorce and everything, you will find she was wanting a separation, and did she want money out of that? A lot of that stuff will be discussed in the future.
And I think he should have been a lot more even-handed with her and a lot more fair with what she should have received
But was
after
he
their separation.
but was he expecting her, hey, you're a Bible student, you're with us, we've got everything right here. What more do you want? It's for the cause. I'm giving everything. Why aren't you? But no, do I agree with you? At some point, there's, and he could have felt, hey, all this money was mine to start with. I sold my businesses before I married you. That's how people think when they go through a divorce. That old saying, the wife leaves her husband after she wins the lotto, doesn't turn in the lotto ticket until after the divorce. I mean, that's just how people operate. So it's when we dive into that discussion, we can get more details on more of the background there. For now, we're really tracking the money with the cemetery and the temple that was erected on there, the Pyramid Temple.
On the one hand, he was trying to keep the money protected for the work. On the other hand, he should have been much more fair with her and what she should have received after. But again, as we say, another story for another time. How much money were they making from the cemetery or from the sale of these plots? We'll look into that here in just a little bit. Stay tuned. There are some interesting stories surrounding the cemeteries as I was looking through the newspapers. There's one here that says, Sikhs lost a bull, 30 days. Press ad, finds him in one. So about a month ago, a bullock referred to in the above advertisement was discovered wandering down one of the pathways of the United Cemeteries, Westview. In an effort to find the owner, strayed bull here signs were posted on the public highways near the cemeteries, and the country folk, in general, were notified that the bull was being held. Finally, an appeal was made to the police department and district attorney's office for help in locating the owner, without result. And then Pittsburgh's Real Finder, the classified pages of the press. So they basically published that a bull had wandered onto the cemetery plot there onto their little farm, and they were able to return it to the owner, but only after they published it in the newspaper.
That's odd. Usually you lose an animal, livestock. I know, and I grew up in farmland areas at points in my life. By the next day, you'd be out looking for it. You'd realize, hey, where is it at night? Or you put it away at night and it got out, and the next morning you're looking for it. So I find it odd that the owner didn't just show up.
Here's another story, and this one I found very interesting. Shots exchanged with burglars. Watchman Brown finds two men robbing stable at United Cemeteries. Caught in the act of robbing the stable at United Cemeteries near Westview last evening, two thieves entered into a lively pistol duel with Edward Brown, the watchman, who interrupted them in their work. The watchman followed the men, pluckily exchanging shots until the cartridges in his revolver were exhausted. When they finally got away, a trail of blood marks on their avenue of escape and bears evidence of good marksmanship of the watchman. So Brown was one of the Bible students who lived there at the plot, and he Caught these guys in the middle of the night,
had no qualms about defending his homestead.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so Superintendent J.A. Bonnet of the Cemeteries Company said this morning, this is the second attempt that has been made to loot the stables within a year. The last time the robbers were interrupted and barely escaped capture. No shots were fired that time, and Mr. Bonnet is under the impression that the visitors of last evening were the same as formerly had attempted to rob the place. So the end of the story is that in the semi-darkness outside the building, he saw two men running down the hillside and gave chase. He continued firing until the cartridges in his gun were exhausted. The fugitive men stopped at intervals and returned the shots of the watchmen. They finally disappeared and have not yet, as of yet, been apprehended. So, very interesting story. And it's interesting that, they didn't have any qualms about defending themselves or defending their property as well. Here's another one. Mourners roll down steep hill. 4 mourners at the funeral of Charles Henderson of James Street had miraculous escapes from instant death in the United Cemetery in Westview yesterday afternoon when the carriage, which conveyed them to the burial ground, overturned as it entered the gates and rolled down an embankment into a gully fully 70 feet below. They survived, but it was a little scary story there. Some of those local papers had some interesting things here. Here's another story. This one is sad. It says, veteran dies at grave of his son. As the coffin containing the body of his dead son, Edward, was being lowered into the grave in the United Cemetery Northside yesterday afternoon, Louis Zoller Sr., age 62 years, fell dead from heart disease. Excessive grief is said to have superinduced the attack. The young man died on Tuesday and was a favorite with the father. So, very, very sad. A part of the cemetery history there. And then the last one, the Shavian Club. And in it, he mentions the United Cemeteries. And it's interesting what he says about cemeteries. Because the question is, was the price that Watchtower asking for these grave plots, for these burial plots, was it a fair price? And here is the local paper talking about that. And in this article, he says, I see that the price of food has come down a bit, remarked the evidently married man with a string tied about his little finger. Yes, said Mr. Shaw. Potatoes are 5 cents a peck cheaper, but competition is just as keen as ever. No sooner is food a trifle lower to make life worth living than this United Cemetery Association offers a 6-grave lot for $28 to encourage people in dying. I guess they're dying to get in there. All right, so the January 15th, 1918 St. Paul Enterprise has this little editor's comment here. And he says, basically, I had hoped that I might have the blessed privilege of visiting our dear pastor's grave. And this is before the monument was built, of course. But I was informed that the cemetery was covered with a heavy snowfall and nothing could be seen of the grave. The special monument, which has been ordered by the society, is not yet completed. So none had the privilege of viewing it or the grave, and it would be completed a year from there. The next, a big photo of the completed monument and the updated tombstone for Charles Taze Russell. This is the Laodicean messenger there. And again, at the bottom of the hill there is that farmhouse where Bonnet and the others lived.
And this shot gives a good account of the actual size of it. So that wasn't a small house Bonnet had.
Yeah, that was a pretty good size. But I think that was the farmhouse that existed there previously from the farm that was purchased. So it was a good sized farmhouse and property that they were able to have and use for the work that they were doing. The 1919 convention report has the plans, has a drawing of how the monument was planned to be. And that's pretty much what it looked like, of course. And it tells us what was buried inside it. It says that they put a time capsule in there. And within the structure, encased in a block of granite, will be a sealed metal box in which is a complete set of Caratol scripture studies, the memorial tower, and one of every tract. Photographs of Pastor Russell, a copy of the Society's charter, and many other things to interest the people who at some future date may open the pyramid and find them.
And apparently somebody has, so that's gone. We haven't had a discussion on the Karatol scriptures.
The Karatol studies had the red edges on them, and you could see the spine. They would put these little dots there to tell you which book it was. So the first book would have one dot, the second book would have another, or have two of them, and the third one that I'm showing here would have three. And they published several sets of these over the years. This happens to be an India paper edition, so it made the size of it much smaller. And in later years, they also had a red set as well. And the same concept as on the side there. And Karatol basically is a fake leather, kind of, so it's not real leather, but it has kind of the feel of it. The New Era Enterprise of February 20th, 1920, has an article about the pyramid monument on the Bethel burial lots. It says the large Texas red granite pyramid-shaped monument, ordered by Brother Russell for the center of the Bethel burial lots in the United Cemeteries. So it tells us specifically that this is something that Charles Taze Russell had ordered. And a little bit further on, it says, above the Bibles are the inscriptions Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, IBSA, dead with Christ and risen with Christ, as suggested by the pastor, who chose the monument design from the sketch drawn and submitted to him by Pilgrim Brother Bonnet in the year 1912. Above the inscriptions are crowns and crosses surrounded by wreaths, and a capstone surmounts the structure. The granite is said to be about 90% flint rock and of a pink granite. So the granite was shipped in specifically from Texas for these. And the monument builders, of course, we know are just right up the street.
And Jeff and I stand corrected. Until finding this, we thought Bonnet was the one who ordered and commissioned into the granite. Apparently, Russell, according to this, did that himself.
Thank
now,
you.
Now, which leaves a question: who commissioned it to become a pyramid? Was that Russell's original idea?
Well, it's the one he chose because he chose the drawing that Bonnet had drawn up. And so he knew what he was ordering, he knew what he was getting. And a monument like this, of course, would not be cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it wouldn't be cheap to repair it either, especially after the damage that it suffered recently. So what Watchtower did with it, what they're going to do with it, remains to be seen. It says the foundation for the pyramid structure is heavily reinforced by strands of barbed wire and is 5 feet deep.
Wow.
Specially constructed to withstand the ravages of time and weather. It was put in by Bonnet a year ago, first class in every respect. So I like how they write their little story there. It says the Bethel lot has space for 192 graves. We know how many graves there ended up being. It's not quite that many. Almost. And in another lot just across the upper roadway, the society has a lot of 64 grave space. It says the headstone, a suitable headstone has been ordered for the grave of Brother Russell of Bar Granite. The same to stand 3.5 feet high, and upon its front and back will be imperishable porcelain photographs. And they would have been, but they've also been vandalized over the years and replaced by the local Jehovah's Witness congregation there. So the article says the same thing that the convention report said. Within the monument is a hollowed stone, which contains a copy of all the society's literature, photographs of the pastor, a copy of the society's charter, and other data which someday in the not far distant future may perchance come to light, now effectively sealed up. And of course, we know that this has not come to light. Thanks to Tim Thomason, he found out that Edward Kohler was the monument builder, and he's the one who inscribed his initials there at the top. Should be EK, I think, not FK. And we have a couple of his photos. It says Edmund Kohler succeeded his father, who is one of the old timers of Cemetery Lane. At the same location in business for the past 20 years, manufacturing and selling cemetery memorials, Mr. Kohler was born and reared in Pittsburgh and resides with Mrs. Kohler and a daughter, Magdalene, 16. So he kept the cemetery memorial business going. This is our man. And it also says that his hobbies are hunting and fishing. Well, in another article, we found another picture of Mr. Kohler there in the lower left. It says, rabbits continue favorite game of sportsmen in Keystone State. Birds may come and go, and deer crops may rise and fall, but the lowly bunny, the festive rabbit, is with us in undiminished numbers. They'll hunt it hard each fall. In the picture above are Ed Kohler of Pittsburgh. They bagged 109 rabbits and 1 duck in 3 days of hunting. Now, why did they choose a pyramid shape for the monument? We're not going to get into that in this discussion, but we have a discussion coming up soon about Russell and the pyramids and 1914. Stay tuned for that. It's another discussion for another time. We know of others who are buried on the cemetery plot there, but they have no marker. So we have a death record of an Edward Hollister, who was a Bible student as well. And it mentions his death, mentions he was buried there, but there's no marker for him anywhere in the cemetery. We do have a map of the cemetery plots and who are buried around the pyramid marker. If you look in the center of the map here, you can see the pyramid and the spaces allotted for it there. And if you look to the right, you'll see C.T. Russell and M. Land. That would be his sister. She was buried there without a marker. So you can see his grave, then there's a space there, and then another grave right beside that. So that would be where she's buried. But the story continues. There's been some question in recent days of whether or not Watchtower owned the property that Russell's grave and the pyramid monument was on. And we do have an answer for that. It's documented in the New Era Enterprise of February 10th, 1920. So in regards to Russell's grave and the pyramid monument, the Enterprise states very clearly and very specifically that the Society has the entire control of this plot of ground. It was not included in the sale of the farm and cemetery property. So we know from the Russell versus Russell trial that the cemetery plot, the cemetery land, was purchased for $27,000. After Russell died, when Watchtower is struggling for money, of course, we know 2 weeks after Rutherford becomes president, he puts the Brooklyn Tabernacle up for sale. That didn't sell till much later, but he also put up the cemetery plots, the cemetery land, for sale as well. And we know how much that it sold for. It says the George T. McDonald Company sold the cemeteries to the Northside Catholic Cemeteries, 90 acres for $90,000. So that was a pretty good investment. They went from $27,000 to $90,000 in just about a decade.
Now, let's put in perspective. Okay, Rutherford took the corporation over. That $27,000 was already gone in the property. So it wasn't Rutherford took the property, had to pay a bank off $27,000. He got $90,000.
So $90,000 in 1917 would be worth $1.9 million today, basically $2 million.
Okay, that's not a small amount of change. Ultimately, what is being said here, Jeff, is that under oath, the Christ, who chose the organization and the head of the organization, chose someone who would lie about $200,000 to get 3 other people in trouble. And the other guy is either lying about the 96. So the whole trumpet blast of choosing based on teachings and in cleansing and all that, what was cleansed? Unless you call cleansing or fleecing, I think that's a better word. The organization was fleeced, and the trumpet blast took place. So with that said, you're talking somebody's lying, either Van Amberg or Rutherford. One of them is lying.
Well, we know Rutherford's character. We know some of the things that he did in order to get control. We know Van Amberg and his character and what he did to assist. Who's to trust? Can any of them be trusted?
Even under righteous warfare, they both have 2 different stories. So, and now here we're going to get back into the speculation. Maybe that was his point entirely of it, why he wanted to take over the corporation. Maybe others were aware in the board, hey, look, there's this plot here, we could sell it for. I mean, there's a lot of room when you start taking out all these data. Hey, Rutherford took over. Hey, we'll sell the Brooklyn Tabernacle. Hey, we'll sell the cemetery plot. Hey, we got the finished mystery. We'll get everybody to go run out and sell these. In a short period of time, he was able to turn one heck of a profit in that business that Russell was running to the ground preaching to try.
Okay, let's back up and backtrack that a little bit. Let's back up to 1914 and 1915.
Mm-hmm. Where he went broke with the...
Well, yeah. What did they what happened with all the money? They put it into the work.
Yeah.
We know from multiple sources that they were broke, and we mentioned several of them before. We know from
the photodrama of creation
first of all we know from the Watchtower, where it said they let 70 go because they were having financial issues. We know from a letter from Macmillan that Watchtower was broke and that they needed to find another place to go. According to the United States versus Rutherford trial transcript, it says that Rutherford was loaned money to start a legal business in California when he was let go due to the low Watchtower finances. See our Rutherford death threat discussion for more detail on that. That's a very interesting story. We know from Cora Keene, later Sunbaum, her testimony that on the day of the preparation for Russell's funeral, when Rutherford returned to Brooklyn, they asked if money should be sent to Russell's sister to come to her brother's funeral because she was out in Florida. And Rutherford said, well, we don't have any money for that.
I better tell you first how Rutherford got in.
Yes.
See, Brother Russell died in the end of October 1916. The next Sunday, the first Sunday in November, was his funeral. Rutherford had been away, sent away, I understand. He sent a telegram, don't do anything till I come. And when he came, he walked right into Brother Russell's study and took care of things, just handled things. And the will said that Brother Russell's sister should have charge of the funeral. And my father, and she was down in Florida, and we knew she was poor. And so Papa said, we told Rutherford we ought to send for Sister Land and give her send money to her so she can, he said, we haven't got any money for that. You know, if you had your wits about you, you met it. But you never mistrusted a brother.
And Rutherford said, well, we don't have any money for that. Well, did they or didn't they, right? So they had it in property and other investments, but pretty much Watchtower was broke. We have multiple lines of evidence for this. As soon as Rutherford becomes president, property goes up for sale.
Yeah, and they didn't have cash on hand, but when they liquidated, they raised one heck of amount of money to take over. And it's not like a big factory like it was in Brooklyn and all that when they were at their peak of printing like they were. This was a small organization that, boom, here's $2 million for a small, more or less, is kind of a small family business, so to say. So that was a nice chunk of change. I mean, Russell didn't even get anywhere near that for his actual clothing retail stores. So this is a lot of money, and we're going to keep going on this. And it's where this went. Where did it go?
Well, from the evidence, we can see that Russell did at least put his money into the work. We know Watchtower was broke. When we see Rutherford come into the picture, properties immediately go up for sale, new books are produced in rapid succession, and a whole new preaching campaign, door-to-door, money-making business is basically created out of scratch as a whole different approach to how Watchtower had been doing business.
And let me add in here too, that's not to say that left as it was without Rutherford liquidating everything, that it couldn't support itself modestly to continue a preaching work. So yes, could they have sold plots here over the course of years there, pay for this, small allowances for room and board, and continued as they were without getting rich and getting into a big megala corporation? Yes. Without a mansion? Yes. They probably could have done that. But again, for the record, Rutherford came right in, liquidated everything. And as we had in some of other discussions, it might not have went as well as he thought it was going to go. Legal expenses and whatnot.
And that's where I'm going to go. That's unfortunately, Rutherford's timing was poor, because once he did the liquidation of these properties, he ended up having these legal expenses. And it looks like, according to the newspaper article, that they also had to put up the Bethel home in Brooklyn as bail money in order to get out. So
okay, I'm gonna stop you right here. This is, I think, where you and I have a different opinion on this.
Okay.
I don't think they went through $2 million in legal fees. You don't go through that much that soon in legal fee. Not back then. I don't. Plus, you had people volunteering as lawyers. You had Rutherford probably doing a lot of the paralegal work himself. Hey, say this. Hey, do this. Saving on countless hours of legal fees. The money was somewhere. And just because they put up a building for bail doesn't mean that they didn't have the money. All that means was they put up money instead of using their liquid money.
That's a possibility.
Or maybe they in turn said, hey, let's hide it over here, and didn't want to show it. So unfortunately, without getting into IRS documents or actual current Watchtower Bible and Tract Society records in corporate documents, we'll never know where that $2 million went.
However, on the other hand, it wasn't just one legal fee.
It was
eight of them.
Yeah.
There were 8 of them that went to prison.
But you're repeating. You're basically, yeah. And again, to further my argument on that, it's okay. They're filing the same petition for everyone, so they're not charging a fee for everyone. It was a group, like when you take a corporation to court and you take the members of the board. You don't have 8 separate cases. It's like one trial, kind of, with the same paperwork. So it wouldn't have been 8 times what a regular fee would be, maybe 1.5, maybe 2 times. So it's still a lot of money, even by today's standards, to go through $2 million in legal fees today. You could fight quite a case with that today, let alone back then.
But we also know that Hudgins needed legal fees as well, because he perjured himself in that trial, but for the 8 men. And so he himself ended up in prison. Instead of helping Watchtower, he ended up hurting them more. not
So
the
maybe
brightest.
Rutherford said, "I'm not paying your legal fee." No one says he did. You know the judge. We're being humorous here with it, but there's also some truth in our humor about it. Who says he paid for somebody? I'm sure his 8, because they stayed with him afterward, with them. So I'm sure they were locked in with each other. But I'm just saying, I can't see how $2 million disappeared back then in that day's money that quickly.
Well, think about this. After the men went to prison, knowing the history of what happened to the society, we know that they again ended up being broke, and they had to sell all the property in Brooklyn and move back to Pittsburgh. And so after the men were released from prison, they worked on trying to repurchase property back in Brooklyn again. And they had to get all new furniture and everything because it was literally gone.
Okay. My other counter argument for that is nonprofits have a way of showing expenditures. I would, before I'm totally sold on the fact that they spent $2 million and went broke on legal fees, I'd have to physically see the records for where all that cash went. I mean,
I don't think it was just legal fees, right? So who knows where?
There had to have been more than that. Were they giving each other secret salaries that only the board of directors knew? Oh, kick this guy off. He's going to be a rat on us. There was a lot going on during that will takeover, and during the takeover of the board of directors, the editors, when Root comes out with his book, a lot of that will be that you could see for yourselves, and that's through actual documentation. Some of the stuff we've covered and will cover more in the future. All I know is, according to this, the facts. It was sold, and we're not counting the value of the Brooklyn Tabernacle, and we're not counting the money from the Finished Mystery. Okay, we're not counting donations that we're still continually pouring in. Okay, let's just leave it at $2 million. It was more, but let's leave it at $2 million. I can't see how that money went at that time went in legal fees. It's just too much. I could see 250,000. Yeah, it's the big O.J. Simpson trial to keep him out, but not that kind of money. Where did it go? Where? Okay, who donated money later? We had this discussion with Beth Sarim, Jeff. Remember, one of the members donated the land. Where did they get the money to donate the land?
That was Dr. Eccles, the two Eccles, actually.
Where did he get the money?
And also Robert Martin as well. And the Eccles got it from their chiropractic business. And see our Beth Sarim discussion for that, because they ended up getting in trouble. They got in trouble for practicing law in the state of California without a medical license. And R.J. Martin was an heir of the Martin Musical Instrument Company, and so he had money for that as well,
and not Martin Guitars, to clarify that,
right?
Still, who's to say there wasn't money just flying freely, and then Rutherford said, "Here, you donate this money. We gave you X amount, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. Here, put it back into the thing." Mm-hmm. There's just, to me, it's just too much money to have gotten rid of in legal fees. And they weren't paying labor to preach. We just saw an article in the newspaper for room and board plus $10. Okay, back then, $2 million, just the interest alone could have supported that type of business, even back then. Going at a 5% return on your money. So there's just, it's just, to me, it's not adding up. And I'm not being prejudiced against Rutherford. No. I could care less. I've never, got myself absorbed into the religion. I'm standing back. Something isn't adding up right here. It's not.
Yeah, and remember, they went from having no money at all, pretty much, putting it all into the work, having to let people go, to, after selling the properties, to have quite a bit of money. So it's very interesting speculation as to what happened here. It's interesting because they didn't have enough money to keep the property in Brooklyn. they had to sell it. So did they have other finances and other things that they had to pay for, outstanding balances that needed to be paid off? Not just the legal fees, but something happened between the legal fees, them going to prison, and them having to sell off the property in Brooklyn. The money disappears. So did they have outstanding balances that had to be paid off? Did they hide a little bit? There's a lot of speculation as to what could have happened. We'll never really know. According to the local Pittsburgh paper, we do know that they borrowed money in order to purchase the cemetery, and it had to be paid back. So that's where some of the money went. They had to pay off their debts for the purchase of the property. We also know that they had other debts to pay that had to be reconciled. It wasn't just the legal. According to the Rutherford versus United States trial transcript, the trial transcript says that in the month of January last, and this would have been January 1917, there came on for trial in the city of New York a suit against the society involving taxes upon the Bethel home and the New York Temple, covering several years, involving upwards of $22,000. After a long and strenuous effort, assisted by other counsel, this case was won for the society. Also, William Van Amberg states that there was $96,000 in the safe in cash. And that was Russell's personal safe. That was the amount of money that he had in his personal safe in the office. After Russell died, there was an audit made of the books, and still the money for the publication of the finished mystery had to be funded from a private donation. There also appears to be a question of how much money was actually in the safe, because Rutherford is claiming that Hirsch, Hoskins, Ritchie, and Wright were stating that there was $200,000 in the office safe. Now, where Rutherford got the $200,000 figure from, it's anyone's guess. Was he planning to accuse those that were counting the money of a shortfall in the amount of cash? He had other plans for these gentlemen. See our interview with Ruth Person for more on that. Yet elsewhere in the trial transcript, to make this clear, this is what Rutherford's accusing those who opposed him of stating. Yet we have from Van Amberg's own testimony in the trial transcript that there was $96,000. Which was it? Is Rutherford trying to make those who opposed him look bad? The bail money alone for the 8 defendants was $2,500 each. That's $20,000 alone for just the bail money. The cost of printing the finished mystery, and they got that through donation, but did they pay the donation back? Unknown. The cost of that was $25,000 just for the printing costs alone. They spent $25,000 printing the Bible Students Monthly, which was another one of the publications that the government objected to. So that's tens of thousands of dollars there, let alone whatever taxes they had to pay, their other hidden costs and things like that. It'd be very easy to explain where that amount of money, the $90,000, could have gone to. That's why they had to start selling off more property and move back to Brooklyn, while Rutherford and his friends were in prison. I could see the $90,000 as operating expenses, but they burned through it very, very quickly in 1917 and 1918. Basically, they lost everything again and had to start from scratch.
Okay, but one last, again, another counter argument. Any outstanding debts? Okay, Russell was not the type of person to get into debt. Okay, let's look at it. The fact that he wanted to put $27,000 in the investment of the cemetery to hold, some sort of security shows. Yes, did they lose a lot of money for the photo drama creation? But they weren't absolutely dead broke. So it wasn't, there was other factors in there. And then wham, all of a sudden, over $2 million. It's just.
And then all of a sudden, they don't have enough money to keep the Brooklyn offices open, and they have to sell the property and go back to Pittsburgh.
Or was that
Allegheny.
Or was that just a brilliant business move? You know,
Yeah,
Rutherford
how could it
saying,
be?
why should we be paying for 2 of these buildings? You know, I could
Well,
sell all my books out of here. I could do this. I could do that. So just because he sold a building or doesn't mean they couldn't afford it. It means why have it?
this would have been decided by those who were left behind. Remember, Rutherford's in prison.
Hmm.
When Rutherford gets back, instead of just saying, okay, we've got the property in Allegheny, in Pittsburgh, let's use what we've got there. He says, no, I want to be back in Brooklyn. And he asks, and he starts purchasing again property in Brooklyn and purchases new furniture. He didn't even want the old furniture that they had. He wanted the nice things. He ended up with a mansion out of the deal later on, of course.
We'll never know for sure.
Yeah,
100%.
So at the end of 1917, there's not a lot of cash on hand. By the end of 1918, there's a lot of cash on hand. So there's a big difference between one year to the next.
But Jeff, I'm going to disagree with you on this. I'm going to say there wasn't a lot of cash on hand reported in 1917 that mysteriously came back again or was added to. Okay, there's too much going on. If you review everything, because I've been writing down what we've been uncovering and making a list. Okay, the $27,000 lot loan for the farm in the cemetery land. Okay, purchased 1905. Paying one, they had to put a deposit down, so it wasn't a $27,000 loan. So they've been paying on it for 12 years. Okay, so that reduced it considerably because it was probably back then they were like 20-year loans. Okay, that's reasonable to say. Even give them 30, even given 30, they paid down quite a bit. Okay, so they paid it down. It wasn't a full borrow of 27,000. Okay, now you take that section where it was stated saved $51,000 cash. Okay, that is the most realistic statement because when you take the tax liability, $22K, which they probably won because it's a nonprofit organization, it's a religious organization. I'm going to say they won. They saved $20K. Looked like they only paid $2,000 on that kind of tax loan. Now we got the Bible Student Monthly and the paper company. Both of those entities owed money, $25,000 and $14,000. Okay, let's say that one's real, but those were settlements in themselves. Outstanding debt that you talked about of $32K only paid back $6,000. Okay, now you've got the bail, $20,000. Okay, this is the one, if we could trace this one, I'd like to do, we probably can't at this point in time. But when they were cleared, that you get the bail money back. So we could even erase that out of there, the bail money. So minimum they save 51,000. Now you add, according to their records, and that's assuming they're accurate because we'll go back to the office. They didn't know whether they had 96,000 or 200,000. Okay. So now donations in 1917 were 29,000. Could have been more. Okay. It's nonprofit. It's cash coming in. Who kept 100,000, 200,000 in a safe back then? The only people who do that is when you're trying to hide money, when you don't want to run it through a bank. You run a cash business, you run it, you don't put it on the books. You show, okay, I made 100, okay, here's 20, I made $20, you take 80 and you hide it. Okay, that's what was going on. Okay, so right there, you've got over 230,000 in just that. So now you've got, then on top of it, you've got the discrepancy between in the court case, statements under oath by both Van Amberg and Rutherford. Both, one is saying we had 96,000 in the safe. Rutherford saying no, we had 200,000.
Yeah, there's an absolute discrepancy there. Two different numbers, and they're not even close to each other.
No. So with that said, let's be realistic here. There was a lot more money floating around and flying around than debts and money going out. And I didn't even count the sales from the finished mystery.
Are you finished?
There's nothing more that needs to be said. I'm gonna stand by. It's not. This is not accurate. What they're saying for them to be broke. I think on paper they were broke. I don't think Rutherford needed to sell the tavern, needed to do this, needed to do that, because it looks like after all the cash was hit and everything was done, oh, let's go back to Brooklyn. Boom. But you hit everything and did what you had to do first. It's just even the government was looking at them. Wait, you owe us money. You don't owe money unless you made money. That's always a joke in businesses. You know, some of them, I hate paying taxes. Others, oh, I love paying taxes because that means I made a lot of money. So I'm going to state, you know, I think you're trying to be fair in stating that they might, you know, they were broke. I'm going to disagree with that. I think on paper they were broke, but I think there was a lot more going on. Hiding money with the board of directors, and when you add what happened with the will, when you add what happened after everything settled down, selling books, buying a mansion, buying the Cadillacs, it doesn't add up.
But it depends on when you're talking about. So if you're looking at the Russell era and they have to let 70 people go because they don't have enough finances to keep it going, because they put all the money into the work. Yeah, that's evidence of them being broke. I mean, we have we have all that testimony. We have all that testimony of them stating that. By the time you get to 1917, 1918, 1919,
yes,
there's a difference.
That's that.
Yeah, and so in 1917,
Russell did go broke. Russell went broke and had a few assets left. But what I'm saying is, by the time it all turned around. With selling the tabernacle, settling for pennies on the dollar, all the debt, selling the cemetery, the money that was in the safe and all that, I'm saying it looked like Russell might have had it broke, but overnight they
turned it around. Yeah.
San Diego, hey, and it's rumored the old man's dead. Okay, he flies in, boom, takes over everything, turns a big profit. In the process of turning the big profit, he ticked off the government for sedition, then claimed it was righteousness that they were saying in the Finnish mystery, which had nothing to do with it. They were arrested for writing letters, as we showed in our other discussion, writing letters telling people not to serve the military who they already told to join. So it's just there's too much cash going on there.
Okay, let's look at the cash. All right. So before we get there, I'm going to look at the 1917, 1918, and 1919, and then I want to hear your comment. So in 1917, at the end of the year, they claim they've got about $29K on hand. 1918, they're claiming they have $29K on hand.
But 1919, they showed in their own Watchtower, they got 203,000 in donations.
Yeah.
So how do you have 29 when you just added 203?
But their donations were 203.5K. So they ended up moving now up to 236,000. So now in 1919, for the Good Hopes, the receipts, they got 183,000 in donations. In 1919, their balance on hand was 15,000 on paper, but all their expenses was 167,000.
Okay, that's tax deduction. That's
So they
that's Sarim was a tax.
They were starting to turn things around. This is when they're starting to turn things around. 1919. But this is after the sale of the property. The Brooklyn Tabernacle, the Bethel was soon sold, the farm, and who knows what other things that they had that they were.
Okay, so then roughly it's even double of what we were talking about earlier when you want to go there. Because now now it's at 183 after all the liabilities have been paid. So now you have almost 200,000, which is equal to what? 4 million roughly. So they didn't. We were wrong. I admit I was wrong, Jeff. They didn't have 2 million. They had 4 million. Okay, so they didn't go through. They couldn't have gone. That's what I've been trying to say. They could not have gone through that kind of money in a court case.
And that isn't really what I was saying either. Remember, it's all the expenses that they had that led up to the situation that they were in. Russell era, they were broke. By the time you get to Rutherford and he's selling off properties and trying to settle cases, he's able to start building the funds back up. And so by looking at the funds in 17, 18, and 19, you can see it's steadily increasing as it's going.
And now I give him credit for coming in and trying to save and salvage the poor business practice at that time of Russell. I'm going to give Rutherford credit on that. But if you did it to buy yourself a mansion, a couple of Cadillacs, a New York apartment, a San Diego apartment, mansion, no, it's.
But remember, that money did not come from the society for the land, for the vehicles, or for the land, or for Beth Sarim. We know where those finances came from.
Even wealthier than what we were thinking. It just keeps getting better.
Private donation, yeah, and it got even more extreme as time went on, as it got more and more people. By the time you got to the 1930s and 40s, things had a big turnaround, and look where they are today.
What that means is, okay, I want $12,000 worth of Canadian whiskey. That's an IRS deduction of entertainment.
Not during Prohibition.
Not at that time.
Yeah, because at that time, that would have cost you a little bit more because you had to bring it illegally.
The 2 Cadillacs were tax deductible. Beth Sarim was a tax deduction.
So if they brought the liquor in illegally, that would have cost a lot more because you have a lot of other costs involved with that. So, but that's later on.
I'll give you that. We spared no expense in alcohol. I'll give you that. I'm going to give you that. But remember, here we go back to again. You show I spent $25,000 in printing to make a book. That's tax deductible. Okay. Now, how much revenue came in donations for that book that you sold in cash? They came in with quarters that added up to hundreds of thousands. Okay, did they claim it all? Likely not. And my proof in that is the discrepancies right under oath in court cases: 96,000 in the safe, 200 in the safe.
Well, this is the question. Let's talk about that then. What was the amount that was in the safe? 96,000 or 200,000? And why is there a discrepancy? Rutherford writes a letter stating there is 200,000 in the safe. Yet when Van Amberg's on trial, on the stand, in court, he says no, there was 96,000 in the safe. So what I think Rutherford was doing, and remember who Rutherford is claiming counted the cash, the people that he's not agreeing with, the people that he wants to get rid of. So I think he was trying to find a way to set them up, and he found another way to do it through legal means. And again, if you haven't seen our Rude Person interview, see that. And by the way, the book should be out very, very shortly.
Okay, I can see how you could think that. But I also think there was so much money flying around, they had no idea what they were doing.
Right? And he's trying to find something to pin on them in case he can't get rid of them through his legal maneuverings.
I believe he is fully capable of all that. And I believe he's fully capable of also hiding a lot more money than others really even think he does. And maybe he didn't even know what they said, and he just assumed. I knew, here, I'll give an example of how money flies around. I knew of a nonprofit organization firsthand who, to raise money, what they did was once a week, they had a bingo night. And you would see, it's comical. You ain't seen nothing funnier. A bunch of 80-year-old women slapping down hundreds for bingo cards. I mean, these ladies are addicted to it. I mean, they take it serious. You're like, it's like poker, in Vegas to them. And I know the nonprofit because I was friends with some of the guys, and the money that was taken in, two guys used to go in the back room. All the workers, well, bring in the cash. What they said they made that night and wrote down was not what was taken in. So that's what I'm saying about Rutherford. It's like a laundromat. It's the perfect. A lot of people own laundry and car washes. It's a perfect IRS scam. You take in. Nobody knows what you're taking in. You take the coins, and you report. Okay, I made $200, but I'm counting 40. So the donation, Watchtower and Bible Tract Society, Rutherford period, was a great way to launder money through books with free labor. You've got free labor. You've got people. They did all the publishers come in with a check? Oh, here I sold 8 finished mysteries. Here's
that's when that entire publisher thing started, and Counting Time. That was all during that period. That's when everybody had to go door to door, and everybody had
replacing.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say I think they weren't as broke as you. I give you credit for trying to be fair with them, and I'm trying to be fair, but I'm also trying to be realistic. And based on how it turned out 10 years later, with the mansions and everything else, it was a money laundering scheme, and that doesn't count supporting his wife and son. How far away from Beth Sarim?
There was between San Diego and LA, basically.
Okay, so now you're
not a short distance, right?
So you got your apartment place in New York. You got one in San Diego. You're paying your son and your wife to stay out of my hair while I move my secretary in. There's a lot going on. And wait, I'm going to bless the divorce of those two guys. What did they have on Rutherford that he allowed that? I mean, there's just too much going on.
See our discussion on The Man Who Dared Disfellowship Rutherford for more on that.
So that's somehow people asked us to talk about the pyramid on the graveyard. This is where it went, folks. This is where it went. And when you dig in it, when the costs of it and this and that, it just opened up so many cans of worms. Let's end it with this, Jeff. Based on not everything being provided to the courts, I'm going to declare a mistrial and demand a retrial on Rutherford for what the real amount of money was going on through there. I want a full audit of the books. And
we need a recount.
Actually, I'm curious if the society in their records has maintained old tax records of that time.
I was going to say we need a recount.
Yeah. Yes,
I'm sure they have. Actually, I know that they found a lot of the old donations back before even Watchtower started, when they were starting up the charter and the organization. So those records are still there, but the public is never going to see that kind of stuff.
No.
Another very interesting discussion, Paul. We saw a little bit of the history behind the cemeteries and also the monuments that Watchtower had erected. Of course, last week we saw that the monument had been vandalized and removed. And we have pretty much a beginning of our story, the middle of our story, and the end of our story. And maybe when we find out, or if we should ever find out what happens to the Pyramid Monument, we'll get an addendum to the story, but we know the entire history of the Pyramid Monument at this point.
And more importantly, we now know there was even more money than we even knew from the start. So it just the rabbit holes never end. So we'll see what we can come up in the next deep dive, maybe Faith in Action 2. If we ever have that discussion, we'll see what we come across.
Another story for another time. Thanks again, Paul. Good night. Thank you again, Paul. This has been a very fascinating discussion. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe. Leave some comments. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future. Get a whole story, not just from the Watchtower's perspective, but from all the various splinter groups. What were they saying? So until next time, keep reading.